Hi you guys, and welcome back to our book reading for Women's History Month. What would she do? 25 true stories of trailblazing rebel women. So yesterday we learned about the Troom sisters. And again, I'm going to apologize for any things that I mispronunciate, but here we go. Murasaki Shikibu, the first novelist. Murasaki Shikibu was the author of the first novel ever, yet chances are you've probably never even heard of her. Long before Jane Austen or the Bronte sisters were even born, about 8 centuries before actually, Murasaki wrote The Tale of Genji, the book which tells the story of a Japanese emperor's son. Has been called a masterpiece of Japanese literature. So, how was Murasaki able to write a book so many years before anyone else? And who was she? So, it says her name is Murasaki Shikibu, born around 973 and died 1025, around the age of 52. She was Japanese and her profession was a novelist. All right. To begin with, she was really called Murasaki Shikibu. This was a nickname inspired by one of the characters of her novel. Her father, Fujiwara, was the governor of a province. And when his wife died, he looked after Murasaki and her brother and sister. At this time, couples lived apart, and any children lived with their mother. So for a father to bring up his children was very unusual. Fujiwara was a scholar who loved to write poetry. He schooled his children at home, secretly teaching Murasaki how to speak Chinese, something that girls were not permitted to do, as well as music, calligraphy, and Japanese poetry. She was a brilliant pupil. In the 10th century Japan, women and girls usually married in their early teens, but Murasaki wed her second cousin, Nobutaka, which later she even have been in her 30s. Oh my gosh, she waited a long time. They had one daughter called Kenshi, but tragically 2 years later, Nobutaka died suddenly. Murasaki was stunned and grief-stricken. Perhaps as a way of coping with her husband's death, she began to write. It took Murasaki 12 years to write The Tale of Genji. The book follows the adventures of Genji, the son of an emperor, divided into 54 books. It is made up of nearly 800 poems and features hundreds of caricatures. The Tale of Genji was popular that Murasaki gets a job at the royal court. There she was employed as a tutor for the Empress Shoshi, joining the artistic types with whom the Empress liked to surround herself. Controversially, Murasaki taught the Empress Chinese, just as her father had taught her, even though it was still frowned upon for women to know. While at court, Murasaki kept a diary. She recorded how courtiers dressed in the latest fashions. She also wrote that their makeup was white and that their teeth had been blackened. But these women wrote too, and their poetry and literature is still valued today. Details of the rest of her life are a little sketchy. Murasaki found life at court to be silly and superficial, and she is thought to have entered a convent a few years before she died. But she isn't forgotten. 1,000 years after her death, the tale of Genji is still in print, so you can actually read it yourself. But if you're going to give it a try, make sure you're sitting really comfortably before you start. It's a whopping 1,216 pages. Oh, that's a long book. So, the question, what would Murasaki do, is, no, you just found out you're moving to a new house and you're devastated. That's a big word for very sad. But it gets worse. You're moving to the other end of the country too? And you don't know anyone there. What would Murasaki Shikibu do? Well, the answer says, luckily, Murasaki had first-hand knowledge of this situation. She didn't just move to a new house. She moved to the royal court, where things were massively different from the world she had left. So she kept a diary about it. But if she were a 21st century girl like you, Murasaki would blog. It would be a great way of sharing her feelings while keeping in touch with her old friends. Try that. And here's the quote. No art or learning is to be pursued half-heartedly, and any art worth learning will certainly reward more or less generously the effort made to study it. From the Tale of Genji by Murasaki Shikibu. And here she is writing the book. And that is the end of today's lesson, but tomorrow we'll be reading about Joan of Arc, Teenage Leader. All right, see you tomorrow for more women's history.